What does it mean to get started embracing a culture of data-driven continuous improvement? What does it look like? So what we're going to do is first, we're going to set up a structure, which is a great way for us to organize our data. Then we'll set out some surveys, get some data through those surveys. Then we'll start to look at the analysis. And then, of course, we'll look at the reports themselves and then start taking some action. So why don't we create a structure right away? What we do here is we go to the structure screen. What I'm going to do here is go to create folder and create a folder which is going to sort of be the parent folder of all of this. And in this case, let me just call this company. It's a nice high-level name for a parent. And then underneath that, why don't we create a structure that more or less mimics the organization itself. Now, it all depends on how you're set up. You can set this up in any way you want, but let's just set up in a very sort of basic setup. Let's say use something that's fairly common. Maybe we will have a division underneath here, and underneath the division, we might perhaps have a portfolio. And in that portfolio, we may have a number of different programs. Programs can take, some different names. Some people call them arts, agile release trains. Others just call them programs. So why don't we just call this a program, and just to show you how you can set this up. And then underneath the programs, that's where the teams come up. And here, of course, you can create teams, and you can create as many as you want. And let me just call this team 1. And then we'll call this, how about we call this squad 1, just to make sure we can get that set up. And people use different names for teams as well. All good. No worries there. The important thing, of course, is that you set this up and you do it in a way that makes sense to you. So I'm just going to rename this also just to make sure you can see how quickly you can make those. If you make any changes, you can make that change very quickly. How do you add the team members? Pretty simple. You can just go to the team itself. You click on this little team members icon here. And you can just type in the emails of the people that's going to get the surveys. So I put myself in this one. And again, you can add as many team members as you like. We don't do any types of limits to how many team members. You can then choose whichever survey you want. You add the capability. And once you've done that, you're ready to go. You can then send out the survey by clicking share and invite your teammates. Once you do that, the person who is the recipient, the person who is part of the team, will then get a link in an email and click that link and then answer the survey. And then you will see that these responses will increment by 1 per person. We're now ready to get to the point where we can start to do some analysis. And this, of course, is where the fun begins. So what do we do? Well, let's go to analysis. And in this case, I'm going to do this using some test data to kind of show you how this works. But what you would do is you would look at your analysis, and what you would do is you will say, okay, what kind of data am I looking to compare? What kind of information am I looking for here? Now, the good news is the more data you collect, the more teams you involve, the more interesting information you can get, the more richness is what you can look for. So in this case, we're looking at comparative agility as our capability, and you can see that the screen here is sort of split in two. On one hand, you have what we call the target data set, which is the data that you want to compare. So the data you're looking to compare is on the left-hand side. Now, in this case, you can see it here. That's all the data that we have collected. This is data that we can start to look for when we're trying to see where we're going to go next. What kind of information are we looking for? Now, on the right-hand side, you have the data you can compare it to. So here on the left-hand side, the data set we want to compare. On the right-hand side, what do you want to compare it to? Now, you can do all sorts of interesting permutations here. If you look at the data on the left-hand side, you have the portfolio, a product line, a division. Underneath there, you have a location, and then you have multiple teams. Here's Team AHA, Duran Duran, Erasure, and then you have a number of other teams here on the Chicago. So you can take any of these data sets or any aggregation of these data sets and then compare that to anything you want on the right-hand side. Now, on the right-hand side, you have the World Index, which is the world's largest agility index. We have more than 4 million data points at this point. So this is one of those things that keeps growing. And it's really the good, bad, and ugly of Agile. Wouldn't say it's necessarily something you should strive for, but I do think it's a really accurate approximation of what's happening in Agile today. Now, we also have an industry-specific benchmark. So it, of course, is a specific benchmark to a certain industry. So if you want to compare yourself to a given industry, that would be a great index to use. You can also do no benchmark if you just want to just purely see how you're doing and not compare yourself to anything. And then you have trends if you want to see how you're doing over time. That can be quite useful as well. Here is a chance to compare yourself to the last period if you just want to compare yourself to how you did last time you did a survey, for instance. And then, of course, here are other parts of your organization. So you can compare yourself to other parts of your organization or to yourself at a different point in time. Now, what we're going to do for this webinar is do a relatively simple report that involves a lot of data so that you can kind of get an idea of the power of the platform, but also what kind of insights we get out of it. So in this case, why don't we go in here and say, let's do the entire Division A. So what we're looking at now is Division A, and we're including all the teams in Berlin and all the teams in Chicago. That is a pretty big data set. And then let's look at comparing it against the World Index. Let's look at the results. And now we're at the point where we're looking at the reports themselves and what kind of insights they give us. So let's look at this from a few angles and see some of the things that we can do with this particular data. First of all, we're looking at Division A, which is what we chose on the left-hand side of that previous screen. And then on the right-hand side, we have the CA World Index. That was that comparison data set, if you remember. Now, this is good. Now, what does it mean? Well, what's happening is that the CA World Index in this case is normalized to 0. So this horizontal line here is the CA World Index. This means that every time Division A is indicating they're doing better than the world, it's going to be above the line, positive, or blue. And every time Division A is saying they're doing worse than the world, it's going to be below the line, negative or orange. Now, here's another thing that I think we want to include as we look at this data, distributional characteristics. What that is doing is giving us what we call a box plot. That is essentially a way to visually illustrate the level of cohesion or agreement inside the data set. So when you see a very large vertical bar, in this case, a large vertical box plot, that tells you that there's a lot of dispersion of the data, that people are not agreeing with each other. The impact matrix is a proprietary matrix that we created, and the point of that matrix is sort of twofold. One, to understand how each of the teams contribute to the overall score, and the second, to understand how you should approach the team and also how you should prioritize it in your improvement efforts. So let's look at this matrix. On the x-axis, we have performance, which essentially is the degree to which people are scoring high or low on these particular questions. On the y-axis, we have cohesion, which is a slightly more sophisticated way of measuring standard deviation, which is just a measure of the central tendency of the data. So this is a way for us to basically see where are teams scoring high and being on the same page, and where are they not, and what does that mean to how we are looking at their coaching. One of the things we can do is look at the recommendations that are generated by the system. What recommendations does Comparative Agility recommend we take a look at? What we have here are AI-based recommendations that are curated by CA experts. So here, in this case, at the end of each iteration, there's little or no manual testing required. What you will see is a pretty decent overview of why this particular question is so important, what kind of topic it covers, and some activities you can take to try to be better at actually reducing manual testing and increasing automation. So these are all really useful things that you can do as you start to understand the narrative behind your data. You saw what we did. We went to the point where we can start to analyze data at the program level, go down to each team, see how they're doing, and also see how each contributes to our overall score to help us prioritize our efforts. Then go down to the recommendations to then look at those as a way to start to work with the team.